Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Real quick, I did add some foam to the walls to hopefully cut down on some of the echoing. I have no clue if it's working. I guess I'll find out a little bit later when I edit this video. But either way, we're going to be doing an older style type of video that I haven't done on the channel in a while. And that is where I just put a background video of the 300 gallon back when it actually looked pretty good before Big Bertha went through and finned it to death. And we're going to just dive into a topic, and hopefully I will be able to answer all your questions and help you guys through this problem. Now, I have made a separate video on this a long time ago on the 125, but yeah, it's definitely time for a updated version of it. And that is, how do I solve the algae problem within my reef tank? Now, I'm going to go ahead and do a separate intro besides this where we kind of talk about where algae comes from, how do you go about getting it in your tank in the first place, the things you did and didn't do that you should have done. And then we're going to talk about finding the source of those excess nutrients and whatever caused the algae in the first place. And then I'm just going to go through my process as if it was my tank or a client's tank to hopefully guide you guys in the right direction, and you can figure this out once and for all. So with that said, let's go and move on to the second intro. Okay, so when it comes to algae or algae, depending on how you want to pronounce it, it's a really basic single-celled and sometimes a multi-celled organism that uses the excess nutrients within your reef tank and the light that you have to photosynthesize and grow and just kind of either be a little carpet worth of algae that's just a little nuisance here and there, or eventually, depending on how far you let it go, it can turn into a wavy jungle that just sways in the flow of the tank. You name it, I've seen it. Now, to go from one extreme to the next, there's many different things that can happen along the way. We can talk about that later, but either way, it's a relatively simple organism that just uses excess nutrients to grow. Now, way back when we started kind of bringing reef tanks, into the hobby, and it became, a hobby, people actually really liked growing algae in their tank. They would use like seaweed or chlorpa and stuff like that, and it would be in the reef tank alongside with dead coral skeletons, because at that point we weren't actually bringing in coral, and if we were, it was dying relatively quickly because we didn't have the equipment or the knowledge to really know how to take care of it. So yeah, algae was actually pretty popular way back, and I will admit some display tanks that I've seen that have chlorpa or something growing in between the rocks actually looks pretty natural and looks pretty cool. But for the majority of us, algae is just a nuisance and not something that we really want to have in our reef tank. Okay, now that we have a pretty good idea of what algae is and where it comes from, let's go ahead and move on to 3 of the more common reasons why you guys have algae in your reef tanks. Now, by all means, this is not the end-all be-all list. This is just kind of 3 of the more common reasons that I've seen over the last few years of helping you guys out with this, with emails, video exchanges, Skype calls, Zoom calls, all that kind of stuff. Now, the first one is not curing your rock. Now, a lot of you guys are gonna be like, what do you mean curing your rock? Rock doesn't break down nitrates and phosphates. Well, technically, to a certain extent, it does process out nitrates into nitrogen gas. It happens deep inside the rock. Same thing with the deep sand bed. It's a slow process. It really doesn't make too big of impact on your tank, but it does happen. So if we're counting technicalities there, I'm gonna win that one. But the point is of curing your rock in your reef tank is to add stability to the reef tank. A lot of you guys who are just starting out and you're adding all this rock and these fish to your tank, and you're like, yeah, I got a reef tank, it's up and running, it's only been about a week or two, you'll find that your tank isn't very stable. So if you feed your fish or you added a bunch of fish, you're going to notice that you have, hopefully you don't burn their gills with all the ammonia spike from not being able to process the ammonia efficiently, but that's another story. You're going to notice that you're going to have excess nitrates or phosphates. Now, most of us who see, oh crap, I have a lot of nitrates and phosphates, you will either do a really big water change to hopefully bring that down quickly, or you'll dose something like Nopox or something like that to help bring the nitrates and phosphates down. The issue is that when you don't have a stable environment because you didn't cure your rock, you're going to be bouncing between high nutrients, low nutrients, high nutrients, low nutrients, back and forth, and you're going to just kind of be teeter-tottering on this while your tank is eventually curing and cycling. So that's why I always recommend that you guys cure your rock before you set up your reef tank. Just give it some time. If you think you're going to set up a reef tank in the next couple months, start curing your rock now. If you can at least get 4 weeks at minimum of it curing, you're going to be much better off than just throwing a bunch of dry rock in a tank under lights and hope to God that you don't get algae. And then another thing with that is if your rock isn't cured, you're not building up the beneficial bacteria film on the rock, which then in turn protects it from algae getting a foothold on the rock and growing. So that's another little side note to curing your rock. Okay, the next thing that I see that a lot of you guys are doing is adding too many fish too quickly and then overfeeding those fish. And if I want to add a little bit more to that and go a little bit farther, feeding corals when you don't need to feed them, adding extra nutrients and supplements to the tank when you simply don't need them, all of that stuff contributes to, again, the food source for algae, which is excess nitrates and phosphates. And then you go ahead and plop on some light on top of that and bam, perfect environment for the algae to grow. So make sure your tank is capable of handling and is, you know, cycled long enough, and you have enough rock and all that good stuff for beneficial bacteria to be able to process the fish waste and the excess nutrients when it comes to feeding them. So that's something you're gonna have to figure out on your own. I do have a general guide for it, but it's kind of be trial and error. I mean, if you're feeding your fish and your nutrients are through the roof all the time, well, maybe you have too many fish, or maybe you're feeding too much. So cut back on the feeding. If you feel that your fish are, you know, starving to death, then you have too many damn fish. So you need to get rid of some. That way you can balance the system out. Okay, so moving on to the last thing that I see you guys doing to contribute to algae growth is not having the proper equipment. And the number one most important piece of equipment for your reef tank, drum roll please, crappy drum roll, is your RODI system. Hands down the most important piece of equipment. I don't care what anybody says. I'll tell you right now, if you are kind of like, hey man, I don't want to spend 300 bucks or whatever on an RODI system, for one, you don't need to spend that much. You can go on eBay and get something work just fine. I'm just gonna go ahead and buy my water at the local fish store or get it at another store. I'll tell you right now, that is not a good idea. Granted, there are a lot of fish stores that take care of their RODI units and will sell you zero TDS, which is zero total dissolved solids, which is the cleanest water you can possibly use for your reef tank. Over here mumbling. Yes, there are several local fish stores that will sell you perfectly clean water, but there are a lot of other ones that don't, that take advantage of people who don't test the water. Because a lot of you guys just going home and be like, I trust this people. I just spent $4,000 on 5 gallons of water. So I'm just going to dump this in my tank because I know it's perfect, and you don't test it. A lot of you guys won't check it. And trust me, I've had several clients who have devastated their tanks, and we come to find out they were dumping in ridiculously high TDS water from their local fish store. So yeah, that's why I just don't buy from local fish store. If you are, you need to test that stuff every single time with a handheld TDS meter. If it's not zero, something's wrong. Either way, so not having a proper RODI system is definitely the number one reason why you guys are having algae. You need to have that zero TDS. It needs to be taken care of, and you need to make sure that you're keeping up on your DI resin, and you have good DI resin, preferably color changing, so you know when you need to change it out. If not, at least having a TDS meter at the end of your RODI unit so you can see what TDS is going into your storage barrel. Anyways, on top of that, not having a properly sized skimmer can definitely help. Maybe not having a refugium. Those things are You can get away with them, but you can't get away. You can't get away with a crappy or non-existent RODI system. So those are really the 3 main things that I see you guys doing or not doing that contribute to the excess nutrients, in turn, food source for the algae to grow within your reef tank. So with that said, let's go to move on to finding the source, which I talked about a little bit here, and go through the process of hopefully fixing your problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into finding the source of the excess nutrients within your reef tank, because we already determined that that's the food source that you need for your algae to grow. So finding this source. Number 1, I already mentioned RODI system. If you don't have one, you need to get one, and you need to get the proper DI resin, and you need to make sure you have zero TDS. Problem solved, boom. And make sure that you have the containers that you're going to be using to store the water. Make sure they are free of any kind of toxics. They don't have like paint or any crap in there. I almost said the S word. I try not to get demonetized here. Or anything that could possibly cause excess nutrients. If you've seen my videos on the channel, I used to have 55-gallon barrels that I picked up from a guy locally, relatively cheap, and they were leaching into my water, causing issues. So that's why I upgraded to the big one. So just make sure you have a good, clean storage bin for your fresh RODI water, because zero TDS water will pull anything it possibly can into itself. So it's not zero anymore, if that makes any sense. Now, if you've already figured out your RODI system, good. If you're getting water at a local fish store, stop doing that and figure out your RODI system. You can have RODI. I don't care if you live in an apartment or you live in a damn closet, you can have an RODI system, no more excuses. Next thing you want to look after, you know, if you figured out the water situation, is you want to focus on your feeding, what you are feeding, and how often you're feeding. So if you're feeding pellets of any type to your tank, I'm gonna tell you right now, that's a huge source of nutrients. They're so compact, they have a ton of nutrients. I would stop feeding pellets. If you have algae, stop feeding pellets. I like to focus on more natural foods like mysis shrimp or stuff that you can get at the store and make yourself. I have a bunch of videos on this channel on how to make your own fish food. Go make your own fish food. You will not only thank me, but your wallet will. Your fish will thank me because they'll be fat and healthy. They'll probably still destroy your reef tank because they grow too damn fast, Bertha. But either way, they will be fat and healthy. Make your own damn fish food. Next thing you want to look at is if you're feeding your fish, if you are feeding pellets, or if you're just feeding in general, whatever they don't eat within 5 minutes, scoop out with a net. You know, you might feel like you're wasting food, but then just feed a little bit less next time, and you'll eventually figure out how much you need to feed your fish so you're not wasting any food. And they get everything they need. You don't have excess stuff floating around the tank and rotting and turning into nutrients. Okay, so the next thing you want to look at is the room or environment in which your tank is located in. If it's in the middle of the living room and you have kids who can stick their dirty poop-covered hands into your sump and swish it around, or they can throw pennies or you know, toys or sticks or who knows into the sump, you kind of want to do something about that. If you have a dog that licks his nuts all the time and he's drinking out of your sump, or you got a cat that likes to fall in your sump, or it's in the basement and you have a bunch of dirt and dust all over the place. Have you guys noticed that all my tanks are covered one way or another, so I don't have to worry about that stuff? The point is that these issues might not directly contribute to algae growth. They could, you know, add nutrients. You know, if someone's dropping dirty poop covered hands in there. I know that's an extreme, but trust me, it happens. If you got kids, you know exactly what's going on. But what I am saying is it might cause issues with your tank down the road. It might actually flat out kill your tank if your kid throws a bunch of pennies in there and you don't realize it. Either way, just kind of take into consideration where the tank is and what's going on around the tank, and that might be part of the issue when it comes to your algae growth. Okay, so for the last thing I would recommend people do when it comes to finding the source of your algae is to kind of look within yourself. Am I, Travis, doing what I need to do to make sure that my reef tank is algae free? Example, am I testing my nitrates and phosphates earlier on to make sure that I'm not getting into a range that's too high, which would eventually cause nuisance algae to grow? Am I doing the proper amount of water changes when I should be? Am I doing 10% weekly or 20% bi-weekly? Am I doing what I need to do when it comes to water changes? Am I doing the proper maintenance, changing filter socks, cleaning out the skimmer cup, cleaning out the drain port of the skimmer cup, whatever you got going, changing your carbon, changing your GFO, removing macroalgae so more macroalgae can grow within the refugium to help process nutrients? Am I taking care of my tank the way I should to make sure that the tank doesn't have algae? And 9 out of 10 times, if you have algae, you're probably not doing something that you should be doing. I am a living proof of that. If I have algae in my tank, it's because I'm not testing and I'm not paying attention. That's the truth. And I have a million excuses and I like to use them. And but at the end of the day, most of the time, or I'd say at least 99% of the time, you have algae because you didn't do something that you should have been doing. Okay, so let's go to move on to the last part of this video where I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to get rid of the algae within your reef tank, some things that you should think about and consider during this process, and then we'll just wrap this video up because we're 13 and a half minutes in and I got other things to do today. So when it comes to removing the algae from the reef tank, find the source, eliminate the source. Now, there might be multiple sources. You might figure out that you did all the things that I mentioned previously wrong, and you're about to sell your reef tank. But before you do, go through and make small adjustments on these. Don't go cold turkey on anything, and don't go drastic. So for example, if you find out that you're getting dirty water from the local fish store, for, you know, just for example, don't go, I mean, you can go out and buy an RODI system, but don't do a 100% water change because you want to get that water out as quickly as possible. Don't do that. I've seen people do it. It's not good, especially if you have coral. You're gonna cause problems. You're really gonna piss off your fish too. So make subtle changes moving in the right direction. If you're overfeeding, cut back to feeding. If you find that your water's dirty, again, do water changes as normal. Depending on what you have for coral in the tank, you can consider doing a 30% water change of good RODI water and salt, by the way, not just RODI, salt water. Maybe do a 30% every other day for a week. I've seen a lot of people do that. Just keep in mind, if you have a lot of SPS in your tank, you might not want to do those water changes. Again, you could have issues with alkalinity fluctuations, temperature, and that kind of stuff. So just keep that in mind depending on the coral you have. But the point is, don't make any drastic changes within the reef tank because you will cause further issues, all right? Now, when it comes to testing for nitrates and phosphates in your tank, if you see algae in your tank, I mean, you almost don't even need to test because you're already going to get a false reading. If there's enough algae in the tank, it's going to consume the nitrates and phosphates that are kind of floating around in the water column, and you're just going to get a false reading. Now, there was a guy in the live stream, I'm assuming he's a guy, hopefully I didn't, you know, I'm assuming your gender here. He was saying that he was testing 0 nitrates and phosphates. He had algae in his tank, and he was dosing nitrates and phosphates because he didn't want to be at 0. Don't do that. I explained it during the live stream what you should be doing. I know he was trying to avoid dino because in a 0 nutrient environment, you can have algae and dino at the same time. I talked about that before. If you guys want an in-depth video on that, let me know in the comment section and I can go into it. But either way, when it comes to testing, if you see algae, you don't need to be really testing because you already have excess nutrients. Focus on getting that algae out of there, finding the source, and getting the tank better. When you don't see algae in the tank anymore, test, or at least a minimal amount of algae, test, and kind of see where your nutrients at. Maybe you'll get a more accurate reading, and then you can kind of, you know, adjust from there. Okay guys, so I have a couple more things I want to talk about within this video, and I want to get it done as quickly as possible because the algorithm will punish me for talking too long. So the first thing here is, remember, it won't fix itself overnight. A lot of you guys are looking for instant gratification and you want the problem to be done, over with, and you can move on with your life and your TikTok videos and all the stupid that you guys do all the time. But the reality is, you did something wrong consistently over a period of time, and now you are suffering the consequences. Now, in turn, you need to do good things consistently over time so it will fix itself. Just like real life. If you do small, consistent good things every single day, they will add up to bigger and better things, okay? You know, if you want to read the book Atomic Habits, you can learn all about that. So, point is, don't be in a rush to fix this because you're going to cause more issues if you rush. Just be consistent and do the right things. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is just kind of has to do with water changes. A lot of you guys get iffy about this, and then we'll be done with the video. So when it comes to doing water changes, you need to manually remove as much algae during those water changes, however often they might be. I know I mentioned before about SPS and all that kind of stuff, but you could stick to a consistent 10% weekly or 20% bi-weekly, and you should be good over time with manual removal and making adjustments to wherever the nutrients might be coming from to solve the algae problem within your reef tank. So get rid of the algae as much as you possibly can, siphon it out, use a brush. Do not, let me say this again, do not use a wire brush in your reef tank. Don't do it. I mean, just don't do it, okay? You know why, right? The wires could break off and then rust and all sorts of stuff. So just use a brush or a hard bristle brush from like Home Depot or something. You can clean the rocks that way. Manually remove as much algae as you can. Do your water changes, change your filter socks, stay up on your maintenance, and do these things consistently on top of testing, and your reef tank will go back to normal, okay? So that's about it for the video, guys. I think I covered everything. I'm sure there's other things I want to talk about, but we're almost at the 20-minute mark, and like I said, YouTube doesn't want me talking this long. So with that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want more like this or any other content around this topic, feel free to let me know in the comment section. If you want to support the channel, head on over to FishOfHex.com. There's a ton of new 3D printed items. I am still offering $50 gift card for anybody who leaves a review on a product that you purchased. Just make sure you write the review on the product and add the email in which you ordered from so I can verify that it's actually a legit review, and then I will email you a promo code for $50 off your next order. So I appreciate that, guys. I did get a new review system for the website, and I just want to take advantage of that. So on top of that, I did add a new chat robot, Osimo. You guys can talk to him when I don't want to talk to you. And oh, sorry, did I say that out loud? You can talk to him, and he will forward your conversation to me when it's time to talk to you. Other than that, guys, that's about it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'm getting out of here. Bye.